Good morning and welcome to our second webinar on redistricting. We thank you for joining us today for this conversation. Last time we met, we were talking about the census and the impact of the census on Florida as a whole, the distribution of the population within the state of Florida, and the changes between 2010 and 2020. And so today we're going to focus on how those maps impact the legislative districts, both congressional, state Senate, and state House maps. And so we're going to have a robust conversation around that this morning. And we are going to also talk about how that impacts you as a business owner, a citizen, and one who's engaged and interested in the process. But before we begin, a few housekeeping items. At the bottom of your screen are multiple application engagement tools that can be resized and moved to allow you to maximize the space on your desktop. If you have any questions during the webcast, feel free to submit them through the Q&A engagement tool. A copy of today's slides and links are available in the related content tool, and an on-demand version of today's webcast will be available approximately one day after the webcast is done on gunster.com. So once again, thank you for joining us, spending this time with us as we go through an update on where we are within the redistricting process. I am joined by my colleagues, Joanna Bonfanti and Kevin Cleary, and I thank them for taking the time to prepare to engage in today's conversation. So with that, we're going to provide sort of a where we are today in the process. And each one of us is going to cover a different section. I will cover the Florida House. Kevin Cleary is going to cover the State Senate, and Joanna is going to cover the congressional maps. And then we hope to answer any questions that you have with regard to that. So as we begin, we're going to go over some basic information and as we go to our first slide to help us walk through that. Okay, so in 2010, the population was roughly 18 million people, right? Today, it is over 21 million people. To be exact, 21,538,187. So that's a difference of over 2.7 million people. So what that meant is that we added one new congressional seat to the state of Florida. We went from 27 congressional districts to now 28. So therefore, the strength of our delegation in Washington is stronger by one member. And so that's important in terms of our ability to protect our interests, defend what's of importance to Florida, and have more people on board when we're seeking appropriations here to support the things here in the state of Florida. So every time we go through this process, there is a thought of having what is the ideal population for each level of government, right? And so for the congressional population in 2010, it was 696,000 people. And so today, based on the 2020 numbers, it's 769,221 persons. So that's an additional 72,876 new people that would be added to every congressional district. So in order to keep our numbers within the 28 districts, basically divide the 21 million people by the number of districts and you end up with that number. In the Florida House, the ideal number in 2010 was 156,678. This time around, it's 179,485, up by 22,807. The Florida Senate, which has 40 seats, and the Florida House has 120 seats. In 2010, it was 470,033, and today it's 538,455. And so the difference there is 68,422. So you notice that there is significant growth in terms of the number of people that each individual member in each individual level of government has grown. You know, when you consider this in comparison to some states you have 2 or 3 or 5 or 7 districts, and their numbers aren't this high for those districts overall. So in our state, because of our population, our state senators and our state representatives represent a sizable number of people. So as part of this process, the legislature has then to decide how to draw these maps. And there's a couple things that they have to keep in mind in order to do so. The maps have to be contiguous, right? They have to be compact. They have to follow boundaries that make sense. And so they're political boundaries. What we mean by that is like cities and natural boundaries, rivers, and natural borders that exist. And then they try to maintain districts considering major thoroughfares, for instance, as making up some of those borders, as to make them rational as much as possible. And then they try to contain cities as much as possible. So they try to move towards a district representing cities as a whole as much as practically possible. And then there's other considerations, such as making sure that minority groups have access to having representation. In other words, if you have a large group of Hispanics or African Americans or Blacks within a particular area, you want to make sure that those communities have the ability to represent themselves in those communities. So those are some of the rules that are in place that the members who are drawing these maps are thinking about when they come through and make these maps. So something to keep in the back of our mind. So when we think about how a district is drawn, you have sort of a deviation as to away from the ideal population in a district. And so in some of the slides that are coming up, we will see sort of a variance between the ideal population and the actual number that will be within that particular district. Some districts are above that ideal number, some are below. And part of the rationale for going above or below the ideal population as represented by the members is that in order to keep cities whole, or to try to make the map contiguous, or to make it compact, that they would either go above or below the ideal population. So let's go to the current map, which is slide 3. So the current House map, which is House Bill 701, is really what we consider the map to be 0008031, and that is what was produced by the committee. And this map is a representation of what was voted out of committee and is ready to go to the floor. So here are some high-level things to note about this map. So District 4 is a district in Northwest Florida that probably has the largest population deviation, right? And then, so it means highest in terms of being above the ideal number. And then District 6 has the lowest, right? And the rationale is to try to keep the cities intact that are represented within there. And that helps ensure that the cities have representation and it's not spread among several members which have maybe other interests because of the number of cities that they represent. So, for instance, we'll go to District 8. District 8 is a minority majority district, right? And so that covers Gadsden County and Leon County. And Gadsden County is the only majority minority county in the state. It's in essence a county where the majority of the population is Black in the state of Florida. And as we move throughout the state, there are districts that have been changed a little bit in order to make sure that you keep, one, the majority minority capability to draw a district, like you have in districts 13 and 14 near Duval County. You have districts that try to keep cities whole, and as the cities have grown within this space, within this time frame, you have districts like in Gainesville is split within 2 districts, for instance, and you think about districts 21 to 24 in that space there. Ocala is split within 2 districts. And so those are the things as you think about and you look at these maps, those are the things that you are thinking about when we consider these. Now, here's an interesting fact that I'm going to share with you that I found to be pretty interesting. 19 members of the House will end up having to run against each other, right? Based upon the way the maps have been drawn right now. So in District 22, you have 2 members that live within the same districts, and so you have a district that represents Newberry and Williston, and so those districts there will be in competition. Those members, in essence, will have to consider what they're going to do, whether they're going to run against another House member. The same thing happens in District 26, where you have Lady Lake that is represented and Tavares that is represented, and you have 2 members that currently live within the district the way it's drawn. The same thing in District 29, District 42, so 29 is DeLand and Deltona. You have District 42, which is Orlando and Maitland. You have District 74, which is Venice and Sarasota. You have District 69, which is Lithia and Brandon. District 90, Delray and Boynton. You have District 104, where you actually have 3 members that are potentially going to run against each other. And you have Miami Gardens and Miramar, which are the cities that are in play there. And then you have District 116, where you have the city of Miami and Sweetwater. Now, in the legislative committee meeting, there was a lot of conversation about whether the minority populations within the state are adequately represented based upon how these maps have been drawn. So some have made the argument that the Hispanic population grew from 22 to 26%, yet in the map only get around 14% of the seats, right? So that is a question that I'm sure when the bill goes to the floor for full consideration, there's going to be conversation around that. And that the majority population, which in Florida is made up of whites, is 53% of the population, but make up 64% of the seats, right? So that is, I'm sure, something that will be part of the conversation coming up. And so when you think about the political side of this, the 2020 map, in 2020, 71 of the districts went for President Trump, and 49 of the districts went for President Biden. Yet the gap, right, in terms of percentage of who won the state, President Trump won the state, he won the state by 3%. And you see the variance there in terms of the number of seats represented. So the current makeup of the House is 78 Republicans to 40 Democrats, and there are 2 seats that lean Democrat. So in other words, it would be 78-42 as a total there. And so as you look at these maps, right, and pay attention to the process, those are some of the things that you want to keep in mind. And so I think the House has done a decent job in attempting to keep cities whole, making sure that the boundaries line up well, because it's extremely important for cities to know who is going to represent them, right? And if you are a business within a certain district and you need legislative help, you want to make sure that you understand who your member is and how you might be able to get assistance through the legislative process on policy or appropriations or otherwise. And that way, the other thing that's important in these configurations is the delegations, right? You end up understanding how many people are within a delegation for a particular area. And that is important in terms of the ability of that area to one, get someone in leadership, number 2, how many committee chairmanships they have, and all of those things are important as part of the process, okay? So now I'm gonna go ahead and we're gonna go to look at this map by the numbers, and we'll go to slide 6. Okay, so just to go over what we sort of talked about briefly, and we mentioned that the ideal population was 179,485. And we talked about the deviation, and you could see that on the screen. And that's what we were talking about in terms of, you know, what is the maximum deviation or minimum deviation between districts. And so my district could have, so the ideal population is 179,000, and you may have a district that has 182,000. Why does that happen? Because maybe we're trying to keep a city whole. So rather than cutting 3,000 people and moving them into another district, let's go ahead and keep them within the same district so that they are represented by someone who lives within their city. And so those are some of the things that have driven how we have arrived at the numbers that exist. Now, in terms of the number of counties, we have 67 counties within our state. 31 of them are split, right? And then counties that are kept whole, we have, I think that's 36 counties, and there are 412 cities total, and 53 are split, and then 359 are kept whole. So it's important to keep, as we mentioned, cities as whole as possible. And so we have 359 cities that have been kept whole through this process. And so the next slide, which will show a comparison between 2012 and 2022 in terms of how the maps are drawn. And as you look at that, you will notice that at first blush, you probably don't see huge differences between the maps there. But though the small differences in terms of the boundaries of each individual district makes a huge difference in terms of how cities are kept whole and whether there is minority access for representation as we go through this process. And so I see that we have a couple of questions. And so before we go to Kevin to talk about the Senate, we will go ahead and see if we can address some of these questions that have been put up. There was a, let me see what this question is. So the question is, to understand transition from 2012 and 22, there is actual consolidation of districts. And I would tend to agree that there is consolidation in certain districts, simply because the way some of the some of the districts have been drawn have sort of consolidated cities into individual districts. And so that way, rather than have a district go cover 2 or 3 cities, they've tried to consolidate them so that they fall into representing one city as much as possible. Now, there are some cities that have grown significantly during this time frame as well, so therefore they are above the population threshold to be wholly contained within one particular district. And so that has happened throughout this time frame as well. But we have many cities within the state of Florida that are relatively small, right? You have cities that are 10,000 or 20,000 people. And so those districts, you will have several cities that are represented within one particular district. And the thought has been to try to make sure that, you know, you have 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 cities that may be represented by the same member, so long as you can make it compact and contiguous.
Thank you, Ron. And one thing I would like to kind of add to that, as far as that compactness, it was something that was very critical in the way that the lines were drawn. As many of you all are familiar with, the Senate's maps from 2012 ended up being contested and actually needed a judge ruling to be able to make sure that all of the standards were met for the redistricting process. The Senate this year ended up taking that very seriously and wanted to make sure that they did everything in their power to ensure that this was not decided by the Supreme Court. And so just to kind of go over some of the items that Ron was mentioning before, the Senate really put a large focus on Tier 1 and Tier 2 standards. And for those of you all who don't know what the Tier 1 and Tier 2 standards are, Tier 1 standards prohibit the Senate districts or House districts to be drawn in the favor of a political party or incumbent. It also protected racial and language minorities within existing districts, and it also required that districts must be contiguous. The Tier 2 standards are what's known by the legislature as more of the traditional standards prior to some of the constitutional amendments that passed in previous years, required that the districts must be as equal as practical, and those population sizes would all be based off of a scoring system, and the compactness was another item that was very important. And the districts not only must be compact, but to make that a little bit further in definition, the compactness is a standard that refers to the shape of the district, and the compactness by the legislature can be evaluated both visually or mathematically through measurements. The Senate chose to pursue that compactness standard by doing mathematical scoring systems. And there are three traditional mathematical gauges that they use. One's called the convex hull score, which tests the concaves and indentations of a district from that compared to a circle. The other one is the Paulius Popper score, which tests the jagged or squiggly district boundaries to prevent the gerrymandering that a lot of voters are traditionally familiar with seeing in other states. And then the Rioch score, which indicates a district's similarity to a circle. And those compactness measurements based off of a mathematical equation, which falls between a range of 0 to 1, and the score closer to 1 indicates a more compact district. Those were really the driving factors for the Senate to determine whether they were meeting those standards of both Tier 1 and Tier 2. As Ron also mentioned, another important aspect that the Senate had a much easier time than necessarily the House district maps had were making sure that as many counties and cities were able to stay represented by one member and not split between multiple memberships. And so if you move to the next slide by the numbers, you'll see here how they actually kind of fell within the population once they drew out the lines that currently is Senate Bill 100, Committee Substitute 1. And so you'll see here that from there are some that have the deviation of not of being below that target number of 538,455, and some that were above. A large part of that is due to the fact that there was significant growth, especially in Central Florida region and also in the Panhandle region. And the legislature, specifically the Senate, had to take into account those regions. If you move to the next slide, you'll see where the Senate really worked hard to try to ensure that the counties were represented by one member of the Senate and the cities were not split up as much as possible. And as you can see through this existing map that they've presented for consideration, there are 51 counties with only one district in it, and there are 412 cities in the state of Florida, and of those 412, 364 are able to be represented by one district, which is really important. And now there are 48 cities that are going to be represented by multiple senators, but as one can expect with the significant growth population here in Florida and the tourism economy here, it's impossible to be able to build 40 districts within every city of the 412. But one of the items to share as far as the next slide that's very important is what took place this session so far. So the Senate has been ahead of the House as far as the redistricting process. They submitted their map, Senate Bill 100 CS for 1, and they have submitted that and passed that through the Senate chamber and is now for House consideration. Prior to them being on the floor, there was an amendment that took place that was specific to addressing an important aspect about what's going to happen to every senator once these maps are drawn. Under Florida law, all Senate districts must hold new elections after the redistricting process, and therefore every senator will have to run for re-election in 2022. An important aspect is being able to make sure that the Senate districts are laid out where no voter is not represented during a legislative session. Therefore, they had to provide odd and even numbers for each of these districts. And the placement of odd and even had a direct impact on how long the existing senators can run for those offices or for that district, along with what their existing incumbency currently is. Now, just to kind of bring that down to something very simple, the legislature, the Senate determined that even number districts will after the 2022 election be running in 2026 for their next reelection. All odd number districts will be running for a 2-year term, and therefore will have to run if elected in 2022 for reelection in 2024. That had significant implications on multiple existing senators and also prospective senators that have committed their intention to run. So that was a very interesting process. In the previous redistricting process, there was a bingo ball and wheel mechanism that the legislature used to be able to determine some of these district numbers and the implications of those. This year, they actually moved to picking cards and of odd and even. And once they did that, they ended up making an amendment to the existing proposed maps to reflect those changes so that every senator would know exactly what their term of office would be and when their reelection would be if they were to run in the existing district that they're in. And so that was very important this year. Now, one of the things, as Ron mentioned, is that during a redistricting process, there's always multiple districts or senators or elected officials that end up having to decide whether they are going to run against another colleague in their chamber. And currently in Senate District 9, which represents Marion County and Alachua County, Senate District 9, both brought in Senator Keith Perry and Senator Dennis Baxley. The two senators have already acknowledged that they will not be running against each other, and Senator Baxley will look to run in the proposed District 13, which encompasses portions of Lake and Orange County. Also, in Senate District 30, Tina Poliski indicated that she would be running for the new Senate District 30 to avoid a incumbency race against Senator Pizzo. So these are some of the shifts and changes that are taking place right now in the legislature. But currently, the Senate has both passed out their congressional recommendation and their Senate map districts to the House for consideration. And I will say that the congressional maps have a unique aspect to it that I'll turn it over to Joanna to be able to kind of talk a little bit about the nuances between the process of passing the congressional maps and where it goes next once it passes the legislature versus the House and Senate maps.
Thank you, Kevin. I really appreciate it. So as Kevin mentioned, the congressional maps are also in the works, and the Senate has voted out their congressional map. What was interesting about what happened the week that they took up their congressional and Senate maps is that the governor's general counsel, Ryan Newman, submitted a congressional map on the Sunday evening before that week of session. And it was quite a surprise for all of us in the process. The sitting governor of our state has never, as far as we know, submitted his own map in modern history. So it was just really incredibly unusual. And what the governor's map did was it favored Republicans in 18 out of the 28 congressional districts and reduced 4 of the Black-oriented districts down to just 2. In contrast, his plan also increased Hispanic access seats from 4 to 5. Some experts were saying that in 2 of the 5 districts, the Hispanic population is not large enough to assure that a candidate of their choice could be elected. So that's an issue that's already been flagged with the governor's proposed congressional map. So why does it matter that the governor submitted his own map? Well, the congressional maps are different than the House and Senate maps. The congressional maps actually go to the governor for his review and approval. So he can actually veto the map the legislature sends to him. And the governor's general counsel, when they made their submission, said that they did this. They proposed their own congressional map because they believe it's in compliance with federal and state requirements, and that there may be some concern with a couple of districts in the map that the Senate was putting forward. I think specifically they were referring to the district that's held currently by Congressman Al Lawson, which, spreads from Tallahassee to Jacksonville, essentially. And the governor's staff has referred to a number of times as a gerrymandered district. The Senate, in response to this map that was submitted to them in quite the surprise move, chose not to address the governor's proposal. They did not bring it up for discussion on the floor. And in comments with the Senate Redistricting Chair Rodriguez and with President Simpson after the floor session, those gentlemen indicated that the map that was submitted was certainly, an interesting idea, but that it's not something that they were going to be dealing with because they felt that the process has been laid out for the congressional maps and that they were going to go through the normal process of the Senate and the House both passing their map and then coming to agreement between those two maps and submitting them to the governor. The Senate's map that they approved passed 16 Republican-leaning seats and 12 Democratic-leaning seats. So the numbers are fairly close to the governor's map, but not quite as strong on the Republican side. There was also a concern raised by Senator Rodriguez, the chair of redistricting, with concerns about retrogression in the governor's map. And retrogression is a term that means a watering down of a racial or an ethnic minority's voting strength. So that's obviously something that we can't have in a district and in a map. And with the governor's map, the pointing to this was in the reduction of the minority districts. So it would be a violation of the Federal Voting Rights Act and the Fair Districts Amendment. And both of those prohibit the districts from being drawn intentionally to help or hurt incumbents or a party. So the House is not quite as far along on the congressional maps as the Senate is. They still have to take up a congressional map, and we'll be doing that probably in the next couple of weeks. They have 120 members that they have to draw districts for compared to the Senate's 40, and then the congressional map on top of that. So you can imagine that their workload is a little bit heavier than the Senate's, and makes sense that they're a little bit behind in the process. Certainly the House could potentially take into consideration some of the ways that the governor's map drew some of the districts in what they put forward. When asked about the Senate's sort of non-consideration of his map in a public appearance in the past week, the governor stated that the process will work itself out, and he doesn't seem concerned at the time. So those are my comments, and I apologize for my voice. The flu Rona has hit our household, but that's what I have to share with you all, and I look forward to any questions that you may have for us. Ron, I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks, Joanna, and thanks for being such a trooper for being on today, even with Flurona affecting your household. So, you know, that's an interesting dynamic. I think that the Senate congressional maps showed pretty much a bipartisan product to a large degree. I think that the governor's map, from my perspective, it jolts the system a little bit, and at least there is a marker as to where the governor would like to see the line. So in essence, it's almost like you're starting a negotiation on how the maps are drawn, which is a very interesting approach, right? It's almost similar to, the budget process. The governor lays out a budget and says, this is where I want the money and how I want the money to be spent. And then the legislature is really the one that makes the budget, right? And then the governor has the ability to veto portions of it. So it's an interesting approach that we'll see how that whole thing ends up playing out. What is interesting as well, which I think the legislature probably is not getting sufficient credit, is the importance of trying to keep cities whole. I think that is a very important component to having good representation within the legislative process. And in so doing, it inherently strengthens the delegations, right? So therefore, cities have a go-to person to ensure that their issues, their projects have a specific person that they can go to, and that person has the responsibility for that particular city, even though that person may also have 2 or 3 other cities. But instead of having one person that has multiple pieces of a city versus having a city as a whole, and it makes a huge difference in the process. So we have a question, and it says, do you think the governor's map will be struck down for violations of voting rights? Or do you think it's a starting point for negotiation? So I'll open it up to you, Joanna, first, and then Kevin, if you want to chime in as well.
Yeah, I do think that it was certainly one way that the governor was trying to point the legislature towards his preference for how the congressional districts would look. That being said, I do think they take a few districts and cause some concern there. So with the retrogression issue that we raised earlier, the Senate and the legislature in the previous round of redistricting were really a little embarrassed with the fact that the courts had to take over and draw all of the maps for the state because of the issues that the courts found with improper influence from political consultants. So I think there could be some concern with his map. One of the issues that was raised about the map is that there really isn't any indication as to where the background information for his districts came from by the general counsel. And, the maps that have been submitted through the House and Senate website, they're taking extensive measures to ensure that there's no undue, inappropriate outside influence to the drawing of those maps. And I think that there was some conversation that it's concerning that you don't have that backup information with the map that was proposed by the governor's general counsel.
Okay.
And to add
Go
to
ahead.
some of the things that Joanna was mentioning is that I agree with the group here. And I also think that one thing to keep in mind outside of the question is, I believe is this was unprecedented for the governor to come and submit a recommendation on the congressional maps in recent history, but it may become the norm moving forward in the next redistricting process a decade from now. And it would be something that I think would be very interesting to watch. And I believe also the governor has the prerogative to be able to provide that type of input. So it's very interesting, and I believe it does create a conversation that the legislature would be looking into and probably considering on their procedures for the next redistricting cycle 10 years from now. But it was a very interesting scenario, and it will be very interesting to see how the congressional map will move forward, how it will be modified and amended, and most importantly, how the governor will view it once it lays on his desk. So thank you for the question.
Yeah, and then I'll add one more piece to on that issue. I think there is a national context to this as well, right? And if we look at what's going on with regard to redistricting or congressional redistricting throughout the country, it seems like the way the maps are being drawn in other states are beginning to favor the Democrats a little bit more than the expectation was. And so not to ascribe motive, but this could play into the notion of, hey, in Florida, just look at the numbers. Like, you have 70 plus seats that voted for the President Trump, and only 40 for President Biden. So therefore, there might be some space to identify seats to make up the difference that may be lost in other states. So in terms of moving the conversation with regards to the congressional seats, I think that may be part of the calculus as well. There's an interesting question that is out there. Isn't it better to have two legislators representing a city instead of one? Then why is it important to keep a city whole? I'll let my colleagues address that. I think I shared my viewpoint, but we'll turn it over to my colleagues to see if they have a different viewpoint on representation of cities by one member.
Well, thank you, Ron. I appreciate that question. I would say first and foremost, the big thing to keep in mind is that the legislature is required to develop districts off of some of the political and geopolitical boundaries, and cities are a big prominent part of that. I think another aspect is culturally or historically speaking, the electorate and the voters have identified that certain states have taken advantage of the opportunity to split cities up that may have multiple cultures within it or nuances to it that would make something more advantageous. So I believe for the purposes of both the requirements set forth in establishing boundaries based off of political boundaries, and also recognizing the fact that keeping a district compact and ensuring that that the representation is available to them, they really focused on that. And knowing that a state like Florida that has such large cities in it, there are going to be some cities that will be split up. Now, with that being said, to the pros and cons of that for a constituency, I believe the most important aspect is, regardless of how these districts end up being at the end of the day, it will be important for you to become familiarized with this. You can do this on the FloridaRedistricting.org website and become engaged and involved with your elected official after the 2022 election cycle. But I think it's a very good question, and there are pros and cons to it. But as far as the legislature, they were required to consider certain boundaries, and a city's boundaries or county boundaries are one of those that are the most prominent and most common to review based off of their compactness.
Okay. So I'll chime in a little bit on that as well. So when you think about how the process works, one of the things that I think is important is to try to keep counties whole, and that helps build the strength of the delegation. And when the delegation gets together and they decide the priorities for a particular county, you can incorporate the priority of a city, and having representation of that city by a member that is completely focused on the issues and interests of that city versus having a member that is sort of spread widely, makes it more challenging to have those issues be brought up for consideration. And as you have members who have individual cities that have priorities, they are trying to lobby for support for their priorities and members with other members. So therefore, there is an exchange there of, hey, please support my efforts and I will support your efforts within our delegation. And then within the process, they select the delegation priorities and they go forth as a delegation and fight for the things that are important for individual counties and cities. But there is some value, like larger cities are generally represented by multiple members simply as a result of the numbers. But in some cases, there is some value of having representation by multiple members, particularly if your member is not part of certain committees, right? And so those things come into play. But that's why you have a House member and a Senate member who represent your particular city. Just broad information here to make sure we're all on the same page. So the congressional seats are up for redistricting, right? Because those numbers fluctuate. That representation fluctuates. The number of people that represent your state in Congress at the House level fluctuates based upon population, right? You have some states that have one congressional seat. You have some states like California that have 45 plus, right? And then you have us that now has 28. On the House and on the state side of the equation, the Senate is capped at 40. The House is capped at 120. So you have growth in terms of the number of people that will be represented by each individual district or each individual member who represents a particular district. The Senate, the U.S. Senate, that number doesn't change, right? There are 2 senators per state. And as the population grows, it remains that way. And so therefore, we could have a state with 100 million people. It would still be represented by 2 senators, and those senators don't have districts. They are completely statewide, as the cabinet members have statewide responsibility for the state. So let's think about next steps. Like what happens next? So on the House side, they have to take up this map, the House map, and vote it out on the floor. So they have to, they'll go through debate, and I'm sure there may be some amendments, and then ultimately they'll have a product. The Senate, as Joanna and Kevin mentioned, is further along in that process. So they have moved their Senate product and their congressional product. So what happens next, Kevin or Joanna?
I can take that, Ron. It's very similar to the budget process where the Senate and the House both pass out their own versions of each of the maps, and then they send them to one another. the Senate has actually already sent their maps to the House. And so once the House is ready to take their maps up on the floor, they'll take them up, they'll vote out their map, and then they'll send theirs over to the Senate as well. And much like the budget process, the Senate and House will both then evaluate these proposals for each of the chambers, and they will do like what they do with the budget process, and they'll have a committee that's convened together to review the maps and to make any changes that would then go to the full Senate and House again for their vote to go on to the governor, especially for the congressional map.
Yep, so they go into conference, right? They go into conference and basically negotiate it out and see what they can agree upon. And so once the House and Senate agree on the House and Senate maps, that process is essentially done. And then once they agree on a congressional map, then that goes to the governor for his approval. And then clearly any of those can be challenged, and then that sets up a whole other conversation as to what happens. Now, the other thing that everyone keeps in mind in this process is that people have to know where they're going to run, right? And so they have to qualify for races, and qualifying is typically in June. And so they have to qualify June or July, depending on year. And so they prepare. And so you have people who right now are running in seats that are unsure as to whether those boundaries will remain the same. So candidates all over the state are paying close attention to these maps. Some people may end up having to move. Some people may end up having to decide, hey, maybe this time around is not my time because I don't have connectivity within this particular district, or the way the district is drawn. Too much of it is in this other district versus too much of it is in this other district. So there are some real challenges for candidates as they're thinking through this process. And so, the rubber will meet the road really at qualification once the maps are out and they actually have to qualify. And the qualification date is actually the week of June 13th. 13th through the 17th is the date that they have to qualify to run for a particular district. So that includes incumbents, that includes anyone who is thinking about running. They have to make those decisions as to how they're going to engage in the process moving forward. So for us here, we're going to have a third webinar, which is going to be our closeout webinar for this series, and where we're going to talk about all of the information that has occurred, what has passed out of both chambers, what occurred during conferencing, and we'll try to do it at a time where we can provide as much information as possible. And so hopefully when we set up we expect to do it in the last couple of weeks of March or early April, so that we have as much information as possible. We have a sense of what's being challenged, if anything is being challenged. What will that mean for the process? What will that mean for the races? And then if there are challenges, we may have conversation about how that process works and some possible predictions as well. So we are excited that you took the time and thankful that you took the time to join us today just so that you remember, this webcast will be available on tomorrow, right? So feel free to re-engage with it, share it with others. And if you have questions after this, feel free to contact any one of us so that we can answer your questions. And so on behalf of my colleagues, Joanna and Kevin, thank you for joining us today. And we hope that this was informational for you.